Hi. Thank you. Good to see you. Yeah, good to see you. Good to have you here. Good afternoon, and a hearty welcome to everybody. I'm Mike Van Dusen, Deputy Director of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, the living and official memorial to our 28th President. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to a Directors Forum with Ivan Miklos. Mr. Miklos joins us for the 7th Annual Czech and Slovak Lecture Series. This important series was initiated in November 2000 by the Czech and Slovak embassies here in Washington. I'm very pleased that Ambassador Peter Kolar, Ambassador of the Czech Republic, and Radoslav Kačer, Ambassador of Slovakia, are here with us today. The series, which continues to be co-sponsored by the Embassy, the Friends of Slovakia, and the American Friends of the Czech Republic, commemorates the inspiring struggle for freedom by the Czech and Slovak peoples. In previous lectures, the Woodrow Wilson Center and its East European Studies program, ably run by Dr. Martin Schlesinger, who's with us today, have hosted distinguished speakers such as Ambassador Michael Novak, Secretary Madeleine Albright, Solidarity leader and prominent newspaper editor Adam Mitnick, and Czech President Václav Klaus. Ivan Miklos has had a remarkable career. After the 1989 revolution, Mr. Miklos became an advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister of the Slovak Republic for Economic Reform and later headed the Department of Economic and Social Policy of the Office of Government of the Slovak Republic. From 1991 to 1992, he served as Minister for Privatization for the Czech Republic. From 1992 to 98, Mr. Miklos worked as Executive Director and President of a think tank, MISA 10. Is that right, MISA 10?
Yeah.
Which focuses on economic analysis. After the President Vladimir Mečiar and his party were unseated in 1998 parliamentary elections, a victorious Slovak Democratic Coalition nominated Ivan Miklos to the position of Deputy Prime Minister for the Economy. While serving in this position, he significantly contributed to successful reform of the Slovak economy and opened the way for future prosperity of the country, which, among other things, has made Slovakia a magnet for foreign direct investment. Indeed, I think we're looking at 7% growth this year. In 2001, he joined the Slovak Democratic and Christian Union and became an expert on the economic sector. After the party's success in the 2002 parliamentary election, Mr. Miklos was appointed to the position of Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of the Slovak Republic. At a party congress in November 2002, he was elected to the position of Deputy Chairman for Economy and Education. Mr. Miklos held the positions of Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance until the parliamentary elections last June. Since the elections, his party became leader of the opposition in Parliament, and Mr. Miklos currently holds the position of party vice chairman and is serving as a member in the Slovak Parliament. Mr. Miklos is also the holder of several international awards in the field of economics. The magazine Euromoney named him the Minister of Finance of the World in 2004. He also received the SME Union and European Enterprise Institute Award for Political Entrepreneurship in 2004 for the biggest contribution to the improvement of the entrepreneurial environment in Europe. He also serves as a member of the board of several international institutions, including the East-West Institute, headquartered in New York. Mr. Miklos, welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center, and thank you all for being here. He will speak either seated or up here for roughly 30 minutes or so, and then we'll answer questions. Graciously agreed to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director, for your kind words and introduction. Thank to Woodrow Wilson Center for organizing this. Thank friends of Slovakia and Czech American and Slovak American friends. It's a very great pleasure and honor for me to be here. Let me share with you some experience which we have gained during last years, not only last 8 years, but maybe last 17 years, because it will be just in few days, it will be 17th anniversary of the November 89, when communism have been breakdown in the former Czechoslovakia and in other former communist countries. I think it could be useful and important because at present maybe one of the most important, if not the most important challenge which is in front of almost every politician is how to provide necessary changes, how to provide necessary reforms if majority of voters are against these changes or are at least afraid from necessary changes, necessary reforms. This is, I think, maybe the most important challenge for almost every politician, and we see this very important question, especially in Europe, because Europe is lagging behind in the competitiveness, and in global competitive pressure it is more and more visible. Europe, as you know, passed 6 years ago so-called Lisbon strategy, which was passed with very ambitious goal to catch up the most competitive part of the world, especially US, and to be, until 2010, the most competitive part of the world economy. Reality is, unfortunately, not such positive. On the contrary, during these 6 years from 2000, the gap between Europe and America was even increased. This is also a reason why it is very actual and urgent to provide necessary changes, especially in such countries as Germany, as France, as Italy. It is important, but it is also politically very, very difficult. That's the reason why I want to use, mostly I want to use this opportunity to speak not about technical content of the changes, of the reforms, because it is more or less consensus, at least among experts, what is important to do in such areas as tax system, for instance, as labor market, and in others. But what is even more important, more difficult, is how to politically manage these reforms. I think it was said very precisely by one of the most experienced politicians in Europe, which is Jean-Claude Juncker, Prime Minister and Finance Minister of Luxembourg. He said after another one discussion which we have had in ECOFIN, which is the meeting of finance ministers in the European Union, and after one of these discussions which we have been discussed, necessity of reforms, what is necessary to do, he said, we of course all know what is necessary to do. What we don't know is how then will elections after doing these reforms, after doing these changes. And I think Slovakia, not only Slovakia, all transition countries had to came through so many such deep and broad reforms that it can be used, experience from these countries, not only for these countries but also for other countries. Because in principle and in reality, the reforms which we have done, for instance in Slovakia during last not only 4 but 15 years, are in principle the same or similar, or at least they have been done in the same areas as in Germany, France, or Italy. They need to be done. Let me briefly explain the history of the Slovakian reform process, and then I will go to these lessons in the political economy lessons, which are coming from our experience. Slovakia, as you know, is a small open economy, part of former Czechoslovakia. We have only 5.4 million inhabitants. Economy is very open. We have foreign trade turnover is 170% of GDP. 95% of GDP is created in private sector now. Economic level, at current economic level, is about 53% of EU 15 GDP per capita in purchase parity power. This is also important reason why we need deep reforms, why we need higher economic growth, high and sustainable economic growth, if we want catch up, if we want increase living of standard of our people, employment, and so on and so on. We came through very difficult, not only economic but also political development, connected also with the necessity of the build new state, new institutions, and so on and so on. And we have been then in '98 in very difficult situation because we have been isolated, we have been not invited to the NATO, to the OECD. Economy stayed on the edge of serious financial crisis at that time. It was almost no investors, foreign investors in the country as we took power in '98. First, Zurinda's government, 1998-2002, the most important priority was catching up other Visegrad 4 countries in the integration and to solve these urgent economic problems, to provide, to improve macroeconomic stability, to restructure and recover banks. State-owned banks have been on the edge of collapse, to restructure and privatize utilities, to deregulate prices. It was the difficult period and also difficult politically from the point of view of political management of reforms, because we have had very broad coalition, included also former Communist Party, SDL, Party of Democratic Left. But important incentive, maybe the most important incentive for overcome this and for successfully fulfill these priorities and goals was the entering European Union and catching up other Visegrad 4 countries, because this was priority which unified us despite of differences between these parties. Then it was, I think, successfully fulfilled these most important priorities. We catched up, we have entered OECD, and we have been invited also to NATO and to European Union together with other Visegrad 4 countries. And then, after elections in 2002, it was created government which has had much better preconditions for doing deep structural reforms. Better preconditions because it was more also ideologically consistent and homogeneous. It was created government from 4 center-right reform oriented parties. And I'm coming now maybe briefly to say which kind of reforms we have done. First important priority was to strengthen macroeconomic stability and to reduce fiscal deficit. It was successfully achieved. We have started in 2002 with almost 6% of deficit. Last year we have had less than 3% deficit. Another important priority was enter not only European Union but also fulfill preconditions for entering Eurozone, common currency, as soon as possible. Then another priority was improve business environment as much as possible. Also increase the share of economic freedom, increase economic freedom, strengthen economic freedom in economy, which means to reduce the role of state in the country and in the economy. It was also, I think, successfully achieved. The share of public expenditures to GDP was reduced significantly in Slovakia during last 10 years from more than 50% to around 40% at these days. Also, tax burden was reduced significantly during last 10 years from around 40% to less than 30% in these days. And Slovakia have now, together with Ireland and Baltic countries, the lowest tax burden among EU 25 countries. The average level is about 38-39% in EU 25, and Slovakia has 30%. Another important priority have been structural reforms. The most important structural reforms which have been done were tax reform, which is maybe the most well-known reform also in the world internationally. Also because effect of this tax on the tax competition and pressure which it creates for the other neighboring countries, but also other European countries to reduce taxes. Another important reform was social sector reform, which was imposing much more strict rules, which was reducing misusing of the social system, and it increased motivation of people to be active and to work. Another important reform was healthcare reform, which was imposing hard budgetary constraints and pushing for much more effective behavior and effective performance of the healthcare, and this reform also reduced the over demand in the system which existed before, and also was pushing for overcapacity, which was also in the system, which meant wasting of the sources, wasting of the money. Another important reform was labor market reform, which increased labor market flexibility significantly. We have passed new labor code from the 2003. As a result of this, Slovakia has now one of the most flexible labor market in the world. For instance, by World Bank study doing business, we have been on the second place in this regard among 145 countries. Another reform, important reform, was fiscal decentralization or public administration reform. Part of this was also fiscal decentralization. Let me briefly mention tax reform, because tax reform was the most well-known, as I have said, but also the most influential reform regarding not only Slovakian development, but also broader development in Europe. We have imposed flat tax from January 1st, 2004. Flat tax is 19% both for the personal income tax and corporate tax. Before, we have had corporate tax 25%, and personal income tax we have had 5 rates from 10% to 38%. Now it is only 19%. VAT, value-added tax, we have had 2 levels, 20 and 14%. At present, it is only 19% from the January 1st, 2004. We have cancelled 4 taxes: dividend tax, inheritance tax, gift tax, and real estate transfer tax. The most important achievement of the tax reform is simplicity and neutrality of the system. Imposing flat tax, the same rate for personal income and corporate tax, gave us possibility to cancel all exceptions, deductions, and special rates. Now, Slovakian tax system is, I think, the most neutral and simple in the world, and this is the biggest achievement of the system, because it is stimulating physical persons, but also companies, of course, to be active, for doing business, doing money, for coming, invest in Slovakia. And it was significantly reduced also tax evasion, because if you have lower tax rate, you have lower motivation to do it, but also you have much less possibilities and opportunities to do it, because the complicated system full of exemptions is giving a lot of opportunities how to provide tax evasion. As a result of this, also by the cancelling dividend tax, we have the lowest taxation overall taxation on capital now in the EU 25, because In reality, corporate tax rate is lower in Ireland, which is 12.5%, and in Hungary, where it's 15%. But because these countries have tax on dividend, the overall taxation on capital is now the lowest in Slovakia. I have mentioned that one point was very important. As we imposed this flat tax, and I have said that for low-income people, they have paid only 10%. Now everybody is paying 19%, but in reality, because we have increased tax-free income, in reality, the low-income people are not paying any income tax. Approximately 16% of people are not paying any income tax, and then people are paying from 0 to 19%, which is marginal tax rate. For better illustration, those people who have income only from salary and whose salary is less than 45% of average salary are not paying any income tax. And then everybody is paying from difference between income minus tax-free income. As doing this, we have reduced tax burden not only for high-income people, which is clear, they have paid before 38%, now they're paying 19%, but we have reduced tax burden, effective tax burden, also for low-income people. I'm saying this because this was very important precondition of the political acceptance of this tax reform. Effect of the tax competition. The imposing flat tax in Slovakia have had immediate effect in the reaction of the some neighboring countries. Austria reacted very promptly. In Austria, which is Slovakian neighbor, they have discussed before 2003 years about the reduction of the corporate tax rate. They have had before 35%. The most radical proposals came to 29%. Majority of politicians proposed 31%. Immediately after passing Slovakian, after it was passed in the parliament, even before going into operation, in Austria passed new corporate tax rate 25%. And then both Slovakian and Austrian was pushing also for other countries because investors, entrepreneurs, of course, have been pushing for their governments. And in Germany, for instance, now they have announced that they will reduce from 39 to 30%. One important point was also criticism of some Western European countries, criticism of tax reform and criticism of reduction of taxes. For instance, Swedish Prime Minister, German former Chancellor, French Finance Minister have been criticized. New member countries, they didn't name Slovakia, but it was mostly about Slovakia, not only. They have accused us that we are doing tax dumping or unfair tax competition. An argumentation was that we have reduced taxes, now we have missing money, and we want to replace this missing money from the EU funds which they are paying. I'm mentioning this because this is again about political economy of reforms. And some politicians proposed that we need tax rate harmonization, that we need in Europe the same corporate tax rate, which is nonsense, of course. And if this could be imposed, that it will be against interest of Europe and against competitiveness in Europe, because tax competition is pushing for necessary reforms, which are necessary precondition for higher and more sustainable economic growth and for competitiveness. And for illustrate how incorrect is this argumentation about tax dumping or unfair tax competition, I will illustrate by comparison between Germany, Slovakia, and Ireland. It is simply incorrect to compare only corporate tax rate. We have to corporate tax revenues, corporate tax revenues as share to GDP. If we compare these figures, then results are that Germany, with the tax rate, corporate tax rate 39%, have this corporate tax revenue as share to GDP around 1%. Slovakia, with 19% rate, has the 2.7% income. And Ireland, with rate 12.5%, has 3.5% corporate tax income as share to GDP. More than 3 times more Ireland as Germany, with the 3 times lower tax rate as Germany. Another argument is that it is on the contrary. If we will have a competitive and effective tax system, then finally we will receive less money from the from the richer countries, because as you know, in European Union, money are receiving countries which have less than 75% of European average GDP per capita. Thanks to doing these reforms, including tax reform, we will have higher and more sustainable growth. We will achieve this 75% of average sooner as without doing these reforms, which means on the contrary. And I think another idea, but it was mentioned, it was not a real pressure from the European Commission to have corporate tax rate harmonization, but what is real pressure is to impose tax base harmonization. Maybe I will mention in discussion why we are also against this. Let me now say in conclusion what I think are the most important experiences from reform process, especially from point of view of political economy of reforms, of what is important precondition to do these reforms. Firstly, I think, of course, the most important, and it is sort of evident, is political power. If you want to do any reform, you have to be in the government, you have to have political power. Then second necessary precondition is that you have to have vision. You have to know what you want change and why. And third necessary precondition is will, political will and courage, because doing these reforms is in every country and in every time politically risky and difficult. In Slovakia, maybe also because fortunately in the random, the election results in 2002 prepared this window of opportunity that this kind of parties came into power, and we have been able to use this. We have had also vision. We have had prepared programs. We have been convinced what is necessary to do, and we put it in the program declaration on the government. And we have, which is another important precondition, we have had prepared, educated people for the key positions. And key positions are not only positions of the ministers, but also state secretaries and key experts, key advisors of key decision maker people. Will and courage means the political leadership and courage to do these changes, because of course that it is in every country, it is very risky. In every country it creates a lot of pressure against, and the kind of atmosphere in which reforms are doing is, I think, in every country difficult. Another recommendations, or at least not recommendations, lessons, what I think was important was that it is important to be prepared in advance. If you are starting think and discuss after elections, after take power, what you will do and if you will do this or this, it is too late, because you will lose the first 2 years, and then in second half of election term, it is simply not a good idea to start reforms, especially because reforms are bringing in the first time in first years, 1-2 years, more costs as fruits, and it is connected with almost all reforms. Then implement reforms as soon as possible after taking power. And for instance, our experience is that it is really important. We have done all reforms we have passed as new legislation in the first year of government, with one exception. And this one exception was healthcare reform. It was postponement in this reform. And we have implemented this reform in the third year of government. And it was one of the reasons why this reform was mostly rejected by the people. Because healthcare reform is everywhere the most sensitive and most difficult. politically, socially, but also because by postponement, before elections, until elections, it was no positive results. By the people's consideration, it was only reform which only gave them new fees, new costs, but they didn't see better performance and more effective performance of the healthcare sector. And that was also the reason why now only reform, which was partially cancelled and which is significantly deformed by the government, is healthcare reform. Then another important point, in my opinion, is that it is important to have critical minimum mass of reform. Reforms have to be complex and comprehensive enough, because if reforms are only cosmetic or partial, then then costs are higher and bigger than results. Then maybe one of the most important preconditions is to be very open and to say people truth, to tell them that it will be difficult, but it is important to do it, explain why, and communicate and explain. This is important because then, even if people are dissatisfied with the government, with the policy, with the reforms, they understood or more understood that there is no other way, that it has sense and it is doing because their future and future of their children. And then another important lesson is to do this. If politicians are decided to do it, then to do it despite of pressure and obstacles which political life is bringing every day. And now I will conclude by saying what is the latest the development and what are the conclusions from the latest development in Slovakia. I named this lecture or subtitle was Do Reformers Have to Lose? And by hearing my CV as it was read here, everybody can say it seems to be that yes, it seems to be that our government done a lot of reforms, and we have been named as one of the most, if not the most, reformed government in the world in this time. But then we have lost power in 2006 elections. What is? And now many of observers are coming to the conclusion, natural conclusion, that Slovakian development is evidence and an example that it is too risky to provide reforms, and then that politicians then have to lose. I want to give you some arguments that I don't think that that's true. Firstly, it was not necessary result and necessary consequence of the election results in 2006 to have this government as we have now in Slovakia. This first, the most important point. We have at Parliament we have 6 parties. Today, 3 former opposition parties are in the government, and true is that very explicitly anti-reform party, Mr. Fico party, current Prime Minister's party, won elections. They have had almost 30%. And true is that they have been really strictly against reforms, and even they have promised that they will cancel almost all reforms. But true also is that other 2 parties, which are with him in the government coalition, haven't been directly against the reforms. They have been criticized, but they didn't promise that they will cancel reforms. Another fact is that SDKU, this is my party, as I'm deputy chairman, and former prime minister is chairman of the SDKU. SDKU was undoubtedly the most, or maybe only, real reform party. Other coalition parties, Hungarians and Christian Democrats, have been supporting reforms, but all reforms have been done by SDKU ministers, with one exception, and it was healthcare reform. But we took responsibility also for healthcare reforms few weeks, few months before elections, because we had to do it. We have had also strikes of the doctors, and the party which was managing this reform disappeared before elections. That means we have been considered, and we still are considered, as real reform party, and our result of my party in 2006 election was better than in 2002. In 2002 we have gained 15.4%. In 2006 we have gained 18.3%, which means and then another argument is that the three former coalition parties, reform parties, are member of European People's Party, which is club of the center-right conservative parties. And fourth one, Mečiar's party, applied for membership in this club. And Mečiar was ready to create government together with these three reform parties. Without him in the government, as he is not in the government also now. But this was this possibility, this option, this was rejected by the Christian democratic movement, and that was the reason why reform government and the reformers are not continuing in the government. Together, these four parties, three of them member of EPP, one applying for membership, have 80 seats in 150 seats parliament, which means more than evidence of that people are tired from the reforms. It is the current reality is evidence that politicians are tired from themselves, and of course that's true that after 8 years in the government coalition, in the four parties coalition, of course that also personal animosities, personal tensions are playing some role, which is unfortunate, of course, and this is pity that this reality. But important is from the point of view of considering if reformers have to lose if they are doing reforms, that I don't think this is true. And this is important not for Slovakia, this is important for other countries which need to do reforms, and politicians are afraid from doing this. Even I can say, but this is only my hypothesis, that if we were not doing reforms, our result was worse as it was after doing these reforms. Because it is natural that after 8 years, people are tired from the same faces and from people who are running country 8 years, which means I think, to conclude this, I think people are not such stupid as politicians sometimes think, and as they are afraid that they are not able to understand what is necessary to do and what is necessary to implement, especially if they are thinking about necessary changes in the system, in the economic system. Let me conclude that I think, and last point what I would like to mention is that another evidence that it is correct and responsible approach to provide what is necessary from the longer term perspective for your country, despite of political risk and pressure, is current reality in Slovakia. Despite of very strict and very strong anti-reform rhetoric and pre-election program of Fico's party, and despite his strong position in the government, he has 11 seats in the 16 seats government. 11 seats. He can do anything what he wants. Despite of this, only one reform which was partially cancelled or significantly deformed is healthcare reform. For instance, in tax reform, he promised to cancel everything. He promised in pre-election program to impose again progressive taxation, to impose again dividend tax, to impose reduced level of value-added tax for 50% of items. And there are only two cosmetic changes which are not changing, fortunately, not changing the systemic features of the tax system. That's true that one of the reasons of this is that pressure of the markets and economic reality. After passing this government, it was very negative response of the financial markets and also international governments and institutions. And as a result of this, currency was going down. It was depreciation of currency. It is politically, of course, very unpleasant and risky. And as a necessary reaction for stop this development, they put strong commitment that new government will enter Slovakia to Eurozone in 2009. It is strong commitment, and it is also creates very strong budgetary constraints and limits for irresponsible policy. Because in the same time he promised, not only in the pre-election program, also in the program government, in the program declaration of the government, he promised everything to everybody. But it is impossible to increase pensions, social contributions, child allowances, and at the same time enter Eurozone in 2009, because it is the 3% Maastricht criteria for the fiscal deficit. Which means, fortunately, also because this reality, it seems to be that they will be not able to fulfill pre-election promises, for instance, in the cancelling tax reform and change the situation. Which means it seems to be that despite of this political reality, if reforms are doing, they are, at least majority of them, irreversible. We will see, of course, if it will be not worse development in next weeks and months. But I think Slovakian reality is confirming that despite of this kind of political turbulences, for country it was very important that these reforms have been done, because at least in some regard they are irreversible. Okay, thank you.
You want to sit down? We'll take a few questions. Thanks very much. Thank you very much. I must say, listening to such clear economics, it might be good for our IRS to get some advice here. So we thank you very much. Let's open the floor to questions. We have a good several minutes. Yes. Identify yourself and take the microphone.
Adrian Ramada, U.S. Department of State. Just a quick question. If you are able to look at what the current government has done and realize that, for example, dropping the 20 crown charge for visiting a doctor has led to so much popularity of the current ruling coalition, is it possible, did anyone at the time, prior to the June election, think of not implementing the health care reform? You indicated it was done in the third year. If that was such a salient lightning rod for the populace, if that had not been implemented, could the coalition have survived and you would have a third term?
Healthcare reform, as I've said, is objectively the most difficult reform everywhere. But there was two significant mistakes what we have done. First one I have mentioned, it was postponement in the implementing. And second one was very poor communication. It was the minister, Zajac was his name, he was very tough to doing reforms, which was very good. But he simply ignored the necessity of the communication. And if you are doing reform in such sensitive area, and if you are not communicating, and if there is postponement of doing reforms, then it was the main reason, in my opinion, why this reform was rejected by majority of people. It was really very unpopular. For instance, pension reform and tax reform was relatively accepted by people. Also because it was communicated, and also because it was done sooner, and people could see also effects, also positive results, not only costs. And now what happened as you have mentioned, they have cancelled fees, but they have imposed again soft budgetary constraints in the system. And we will see, it is necessary, consequence will be that we will repeat to the overcome problems. We will again to have the same situation, indebtedness, very poor performance, inefficient operation, the sustaining overcapacity. We will simply return to the problems which have been overcome, unfortunately. The problem was that people didn't recognize that what was done created really conditions for a new situation, for better healthcare. That means it will be difficult. But even in this area, it is not fully reversible situation, which means It was, I don't have exact estimate, but maybe we can say that approximately 50–60% of changes have been cancelled and it was returned to citizen, but not everything, not 100%. But at least we are speaking about this. We are saying people, look, in 1–2 years we will have the same situation as we have had. That means maybe people will learn from this. I don't know.
I must say that in the last 35 years, the United States has tried health care reform twice at the presidential level, and it bombed twice. The first time with Richard Nixon back around, I guess, 1970, and the second time for Bill Clinton in 1993–4. There was a question over here.
George Handy, Center for Governance and Innovation. I'd like to ask you a question about corruption. Corruption has played recently in the United States in the handover of political power and economic well-being. In Slovakia, you and the former Prime Minister have put a real emphasis on countering corruption. It's not an effort that has been successful in any country. What do you feel has been the most important gains that you've made in this area, and what lays ahead to further strengthen the business environment for Slovakia in further diminishing corruption and building stronger public-private partnerships?
Yeah, corruption is the problem in every country, and in new member countries, former communist countries, this even bigger problem because of legacy. Also legacy in informal rules and poor institutions and so on. And we have had special difficult situation because in '98 the country, it was simply corruption was generated by the Mečiar government. Then we took this as one of the priority to fighting against corruption. Now I can say after these 8 years that the most effective method for fighting against corruption is doing structural reforms. In these areas in which we have done reforms, for instance, banking sector, also diminishing of corruption was the best, the biggest. Also tax system, for instance. Tax system, because reduced tax evasion, I have explained reasons, it was really reduced also the rate of corruption. And on the contrary, areas in which still shortage situation, shortage economics, the demand is higher than supply, it is natural space for the huge corruption. Another important point is that we cannot measure corruption. We are measuring only perception of corruption. Another important point was the Freedom of Information Act. This was very important to have approach to the information from the public sector, but it is paradoxically we have until '98 it was no Freedom Information Act, and it was a government, Mečiar government everything was secret. It was impossible to gain any information from the public sector. We have passed Freedom of Information Act. It was approached to the information, and the number of articles which have been writing about, which have been publishing about corruption and scandals was higher after '98. And for the people's perception, many of people thought that the situation is worse as it was before, because we are reading about scandals. Then, which means it is very complex phenomena. It is very, very difficult to fight against corruption, and it is true that it is still a problem in Slovakia also. But also true is that by EBRD report, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Slovakia was country in which during especially last 4 years, but last 8 years, it was done the most significant progress in the reducing corruption. And I think that the most important reason and precondition have been structural reforms.
We have time for a couple more. The lady in the far back, last row.
I'm Julie Slavic. With the economic boom in Slovakia, prices have risen, and I would like to know what either your government or this current government is doing to help people on fixed incomes, like pensioners whose standards of living have dropped, teachers, etc., who really are not at the top of the economic pile.
Yeah, that's true. That in the reform period, transition period, these groups, as you have mentioned, but also, for instance, families with small children, have been in the worst position. But now it is real growth, not only now in this year, but last 2-3 years, it is real growth of the wages, but also of the pensions. We have so-called Swiss system of valorization of the pensions. We have 50%, the pensions are increased, are valorized by 50% by development of inflation and 50% by development of wages, which means, and because real wages are growing now quickly, it is real growth of the pensions. Teachers are another problem, and this will be I didn't mention this will be the most important negative consequence of current government, even without cancelling reforms. That for us, we have passed 1.5 years ago, it was prepared in my ministry, a program called Minerva, which means the development of knowledge economy, education, research, science, IT, e-government, because we consider it, and I think this is from the longer term perspective crucially important, that at present we are competitive, but we are competitive and we are growing very highly mostly because we are competitive in mass industrial production, especially car makers, for instance. Slovakia will be from next year the #1 in the world by producing cars per capita. But problem is that as economy will grow and as salaries will grow, we will slowly but permanently lose this competitiveness in mass industrial production, because there are new member countries, Romania, Bulgaria, there is Ukraine, Russia, China, and so on and so on. And if we will not invest as much as possible and develop as much as possible knowledge economy now, if we will not use this high economic growth for the development of knowledge economy, then it is threat that from the middle and long-term perspective, we will lose this position. And this was also the reason why we have said, okay, now economy is growing, let's go use this potential for this and also for increasing salaries of the teachers, for instance, because that's true that the level of salaries in the Slovak education system is very poor. But what happened now? Now they have the same fiscal limitations because they won't enter euro, which is good. But in the same time, they have another priorities. They have agriculture, social contributions. They are giving now the Christmas contribution special for pensioners because they are their voters. And they have no money for what is necessary for the future competitiveness, which means consequence of or victim of this kind of policy will be long-term competitiveness of Slovakia, because the education will be not developed as it is necessary, and also highways, for instance. It is consensus among economists that we need the knowledge economy and infrastructure. We need highway, for instance, because we don't have highway through whole Slovakia. For next year budget, for highways, it will go lower amount of money as this year, and for education, growth of expenditures to education will be only 3%. It will be a 5% overall growth of the overall expenditures and 7% GDP growth, and only 3% growth in the budget for education. That's the bet. This is the bet.
We have time for a couple more short questions. One here.
Leonard Oberlander. Winter is coming, and could you give us a picture of the kind of tax and budget planning and preparations that are being made to deal with the finances associated with the energy situation for keeping people warm, factories running, and energy obligations in Slovakia and in the region?
I don't see problem in this area. We have the expected growth of energy prices for the public sector is reflected to the budget. we don't have blackout, we don't have shortage on the market. I don't see problem. What we have problem, and this is problem that Fico's government is fighting against utilities, because this energy utilities products prices, this is very sensitive political issue. And also because we had to, during our two governments, 8 year in the government, we had to significantly increase prices for electricity, for gas, and for heating for her households, for instance. Because previously the prices have been regulated, they have been on the much lower level as costs. It was heavily subsidized by the state budget. It was unsustainable. Also, it was against EU rules and so on and so on. For instance, only last stage of last big step in the price deregulation in the January 1st, 2004, we have increased price for gas for households by 35%, and it was the date of starting tax reform also, as excises have been increased and VAT was increased. And now, as oil was growing, then we have deregulated these prices on the economic level, and we have created the independent regulatory office, as in other market economies. And of course, this regulatory office is by the costs and appropriate profit. It is settling the prices. And as oil was growing, also prices of gas, electricity, heating was growing. And Fico was heavily criticized this. He said that this is because we want to do profit for the investors, for the utilities. It is against people. And it is the responsibility of the government to hold prices down. Now he came to the government and he start fight against the office, regulatory office, and against the utilities. And he's pushing. He wants to change law now to have real influence of the regulator, which will be against EU rules and so on. And he's pushing for reduction of prices from January. If it will happen, then electrical distribution companies will go to the loss. And of course, there is owners, strategic owners from Western Europe. They will put it in the court, in the arbitrage, which means this is from the short term for people. This is something which is very popular. It is one of the reasons why Fico's government now is very popular. They're fighting against those bad capitalists and companies. But from the longer term perspective, if they will do it, then it will mean not only the legal litigations, but it will mean also that investors will not invest in such area in which profitability is lower. And finally, it will be shortage of electricity. Also, we have to cancel 2 blocks of the nuclear power plant because our commitment to European Union. And final result of this fight will be not lower prices, but on the contrary, higher prices and shortage of energy. That's the problem. This is the problem in Slovakia now. Fortunately, now oil prices are going down. But if it will be turned and they will go up, it will be really tough situation.
I have 2 assignments now. First of all, I want to thank Ivan Miklos for a very entertaining lecture, talk. And we're very proud to have had you here for the 7th annual Czech and Slovak lecture. And I also would like to call Ted Russell, Ambassador Ted Russell, the first United States ambassador to an independent state of Slovakia. I'd like to call him, he's also founding president, I guess, of Friends of Slovakia. I'd like to call him up, as well as Michael Rokas, who is the president, I believe, of American Friends of the Czech Republic. Do you both want to come up?
We wanted to thank you on behalf of Friends of Slovakia. I want to thank you for a really wonderful lecture. And if I could say, just based on my experience in Slovakia. That's a good point. Without a mic.
Yeah, here.
Here is the remote.
That just based on my experience in Slovakia, having seen what your government did with your reforms to get Slovakia into the OECD, the EU, and NATO, and then pass a whole series of reforms which, because of the interlocking relationships and network of obligations of these three organizations into which you got your government, the reforms which you then passed were in effect locked in to a considerable extent, and I think that you can take an awful lot of credit for that. So we greatly appreciate your coming, giving this wonderful lecture. We appreciate the example Slovakia has set with these. I think, as Mike mentioned, I'm glad to hear that you went up on Capitol Hill for a while this morning. I hope they learned something. But we appreciate your coming. We hope they were listening. So we'd like to give you this certificate of appreciation for your lecture here.
Thank you.
And we'd also like to give you a crystal eagle, which I think symbolizes a bit of the concept of economic freedom, which you did so much to promote. And we will see that we mail it to you. You don't have to put it in your luggage.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I couldn't help but think, as we're hearing you, for much of my life I would have expected someone talking about the economy coming from Slovakia or the Czech lands to be talking about the glories of Marxism and Leninism. I, for one, give great thanks for November 17th, which will, of course, be this Friday. On behalf of the American Friends of the Czech Republic, it is my pleasure to present you with this certificate of appreciation as well, and also through the generosity of one of our supporters, we have a sum of money that can go towards this that honors Tom Gibeon, and I'd like Tom to stand up and be acknowledged. So that is for you as well. And more American Friends of the Czech Republic souvenirs that will fit nicely into your suitcase.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for coming. They will mail it. That's the important thing. Michael, thank you for being here.